back. I believe this is week 6. Just flying by. Alright, so today we're going to do, or this week I guess, we're going to talk about the first, branch of government, which is Congress. Before we get into that, I want to do a very quick little bit of housekeeping. Hopefully this lecture will be short this week. Okay, so first I'm going to go over the Federalist Papers, since your homework was due on Friday. I believe everyone turned it in. Might have been one or two who didn't. But feel free to email me if you have issues with that. I'm just going to go over it really quickly. I'm assuming that your answers look very, very similar to mine. Again, guys, when I'm doing your grading, I'm primarily grading for completion. If you're answering with 1 to 4 or 5 words, I'm probably going to take off points because you're obviously not engaging with the material. But as long as I can tell that, you put in an amount of effort, that you looked at it. Especially this one. I know the Federalist Papers are pretty dense. I know they're pretty difficult. You're going to get the points. So I'm just going to go over it. Your answers should look relatively similar to mine. If there's any reason that they don't and you don't fully understand, I encourage you to reach out because, again, this is part of the basis not only of our democracy, but of the class. So these will come back. There will be references to them in other lectures. There will be references to them in your other exams. So I hope that you're keeping up on them. So very quickly, Federalist 10, we have the first 5 questions. Does Madison warn the majority will misrepresent the minority? Yes, he does. He says the majority will misrepresent them with policies that are neglecting their role in society or considering their stakes or interests. Then what is the underlying cause of conflict? It's an unequal distribution of property, creating factions of people with different economic interests. We're primarily looking at stuff like, right, if you have more assets, maybe you have more land, maybe you have a bigger house, that impacts how you might feel about property taxes, that kind of thing. So the underlying cause of conflict will always and probably forever be more than just economics. We're looking at class struggles. Number 3, what are factions? Very basic. It's just citizens united by a common passion or interest. The primary goal of government is to protect the citizens and the public and private rights. So that's where we see sometimes this clash happen, where we're protecting both the public and also the public's private rights. They should, in that same vein, be controlling factions. And then the last question for Federalist 10 is, how does a republic dissuade the effects of factions? It's through the representative government. So citizens have an active role and a stake in both electing their representatives and holding their representatives accountable. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to assume you've been hearing me this whole time, but please let me know if you haven't. So we can see more so than voting for our representatives, aka dissuading the effects of faction, because we have so many of them and you can vote for different people all the time. You can hold them accountable, right? Through voting you can hold them accountable, but also through campaign finance. Maybe you're not donating. We're seeing this happen a lot right now with the factions of our 2 political parties, where a lot of Republicans are not happy with Trump and a lot of Democrats are not happy with Harris. They're going to vote for them anyway, probably, because those are your 2 options, really. But there's no excitement. We're not spreading the word. They're not donating, maybe. Maybe they're not putting yard signs up in their yards. We're seeing this happen a lot with, celebrities, too. I know Chappell Roan has had this big scandal recently with her video on not endorsing the vice president. And she says, I will vote for the vice president, but I'm not going to endorse her because I disagree with the policies. And so we're seeing that happen too, right? So, like, it doesn't mean maybe not necessarily that you're going to vote for them, but there is like a public awareness and there is a way to hold them accountable, especially when we're very often stuck in this two political party system where our options are very limited. Whereas other countries, right, like France and England, that have massive amounts of political parties that all have roles in their government, it's a lot easier to hold them accountable. And then moving on to Federalist 51, the three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. And then Madison thought the judicial branch would be the weakest because it was the only one that it couldn't like directly enforce their own decisions. So even though they were able to decide, oh, what Congress or the president did isn't constitutional, they can't do that, there's not very much of a way for them to enforce that decision. Checks and balances. Number 2, why should liberties and rights be protected? It's because citizens should be free from tyranny, right? You should be free from tyranny from your government, but also from your neighbors. Government should be accountable to their citizens, but citizens should know that they have power and rights over their government. This is primarily the idea of like social contract theory that we talked about, where the citizens are consenting to be governed. And when you don't have civil rights or civil liberties, number 1, you can't consent to very much. But number 2, the government has power to take over you. Right? Like, we're getting this idea. Remember, like, we're just coming off of the war. We're just coming off of being ruled by a monarchy through England. So this idea of tyranny is very, very scary to Americans. Number 3, how is the separation of powers assured? It's assured through checks and balances. So the separation of powers, remember, these are two different things. The separation of powers is what the branches can do. So the judicial branch rules constitutionality. The legislative branch is writing laws. The executive branch is enforcing those laws. The checks and balances are the powers they have over the other branches to make sure no one is like abusing their power, aka tyranny. So the president can be impeached. Congress has to appoint the judicial branch, that kind of thing. Number 4, federalism. It's just very basic, again, the sharing of powers. We have a local government, we have a state government, we have a national government. And generally speaking, these are all, like, the makeup of them looks exactly the same. This is a little different. Some states do their legislative branch a little differently. Some local municipalities do their local government a little differently. But generally speaking, in the United States, the local government has a mayor, a city council, and a municipal court. The state government has a governor, a state congress, and then they have a state Supreme Court or state court districts. Like, everyone has a lot of courts. And then the federal government, or our national government, so you don't get confused with the idea of federalism, has a president, a national congress, and then a national court system. So they all look very similar. Each level of government has an executive, a legislative, and a judicial branch. And then the very last question, the advantages to federalism that he was talking about. Number 1, states are tailoring policies to fit their small populations, thus being more representative and solving specific needs, right? Thinking about the difference in states, like Ohio is very agriculturally based, right? So like maybe if we're looking at states that don't rely as much on their agriculture, I mean, this is a bad example because every state has agriculture, but a lot of states will rely more on their means of production. Maybe they are more industrial Rust Belt oil states. maybe they're more tourist states, that kind of thing. Laws can be adjusted to fit them. Take like what's happening right now, with the hurricane. To preface, devastation has happened everywhere. This is not to say that it hasn't, but certain states, like those on the southern coast, those on the coast of the ocean, were much, much more prepared. They could tailor, right, because they have state governments that have their own powers, they could tailor their policies to be better prepared for natural disasters like that. Whereas we're seeing right now, a lot of states in Appalachia aren't used to this. This is not typical for them. And they didn't have the know-how, they didn't have the need to develop policies to help them with this issue. Unfortunately, natural disasters, in a terrible way, are unexpected, and they completely decimate areas. So while yes, a lot of Florida and a lot of the southern coast has been destroyed, there was infrastructure there that could help them. Inland states did not have that at all. And we're seeing the effects of that. The primary explanation here being, though, states are able to adjust their policies to what their specific state might need that other states may not. Here in Oregon, I'm not really that worried about a hurricane. I'm worried about an earthquake, for sure. And so we're going to have specific policies that may prepare us for an earthquake, but probably not a hurricane. And if we got hit with a hurricane, it would be detrimental. And then the last one is preventing tyranny, right? Like, we're just terrified of tyranny. So we're distributing power. We have multiple branches of the federal government. We have multiple levels of governments. We're just trying to distribute power because we're terrified, right? We just came off of the revolution. We are scared of a big national government. We are terrified of a monarchy and tyranny and oppressive, abusive power from one major leader. So that's our Federalist Papers. Your answers should be somewhere in the line of this. As I quickly read through, it seemed like most everyone got the point. If you don't understand, though, please reach out. And if anyone noticed in the Discord, someone asked a question about the homework, and I advised them, just Google. It's okay, guys. We're using our resources here. I don't think this will happen very many more times with our assignments. I think a lot of them are not quite as dense or quite as overwhelming, maybe, as this one, because these were written hundreds of years ago. But it's okay to just Google Federalist 10 summary and read a 2 to 3 paragraph summary of it just to get the context, really know what you're looking at. And then I think it would be easier for you to go back through and read it. Anyway, that's a spiel on that. I'm going to really quickly look at, here are all of our homeworks, or our things, our assignments coming up. So we just did Federalist Papers. That's done. We did homework 1. That's done. Our essays, or our exams, also already done. The next thing is your essay 1, which is due this Friday, October 4th. And then in a couple of weeks is the Spotlight movie. You have plenty of time. I'm not trying to rush you. But I would really recommend taking 5 minutes to just maybe read a summary on Google. Think about how this may apply to you. I would hate for someone to be uncomfortable watching this. Again, this is a media-based movie. It is about journalism and how journalists have to gatekeep our government and how they have to really dig in, emphasizing the truth in journalism. But it is set against the background of a major child abuse scandal committed by priests of the Catholic Church. There's a lot of triggers in that. And I would hate for this to be uncomfortable for anybody. So please just take 5 minutes, like think about that, sit on it, and then let me know, right? Like we have a dozen other movies you got to choose from. Just email me like, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this, and we can totally do a different one. That's no big deal. I also want you to look at where it's streaming. And if you don't have access to it, let me know, and we can figure out the access part of it. So it's on Starz, Hulu, Roku, YouTube TV, and then a bunch of other, I think you have to rent it on Amazon Prime. So like, if you already have these things, great. But I don't want this to be like a financial burden on you either. So if for some reason you don't have access to any of these sources, just let me know. We can figure that out separately. So again, please take 5 minutes, really like sit with yourself before you decide to watch this movie, and let me know, and we can pick a different movie. Your essay, again, we've already gone over. If you need to look at the APA format, you can go here to essays. Excuse me. Here's our APA format stuff. You can also go to Purdue OWL. I spelled that wrong. APA format. And then here is all of your general stuff. You can get guidelines, sections, and then also all of your citations would be here as well, in text and the reference list. You could choose either of the two rubrics. Sorry, I'm apparently exhausted. You can choose either of the two rubrics, media, and here's what this looks like, or ideology. Just choose one. The outlines are the same, the scoring is the same, the word count is all the same. The only difference is like the actual criteria of what you're answering. Please remember that I'm not like giving you a prompt. This is your prompt, right? This is the question. Can you identify, describe, compare, and contrast the cycles? Can you describe why media is considered to be the fourth branch? Can you do those things? So this is your prompt. The rubric is your prompt. If you have issues either with APA format or with understanding what I'm asking of you, like what this question means, email me. I will also take rough drafts, and I will grade your rough drafts on the rubric, which means I will take off points or give you points or whatever, and then give it back to you, graded, and tell you exactly where you're missing points and what you should fix or edit or change or add to get those points back. So I will take rough drafts pretty much up until like Wednesday, probably. Here's what I'm going to say. I will take rough drafts anytime. If you get them to me before Wednesday, I guarantee you that I will get you feedback. If you get them to me on Thursday or Friday, I will do my very, very best to get you feedback, but I cannot make any promises. Therefore, it would be safest to get it to me by Wednesday. If you give it to me by Wednesday, which means today, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, I will get you feedback back by Friday morning. So probably sometime Thursday. Usually I just do them as they come in, but sometimes things get a little busy. I might need some extra time. So just get it to me as soon as you can if you'd like me to look at it. But I will grade it with the rubric. Okay. I think that's all we have for that kind of stuff. I should have saved that. That's okay. All right. So, moving on to our week 6 PowerPoint. We're looking at Congress. This is the last section of content that will be on your second exam. So next week, let me open this. So next week, when we start the presidency, judicial, and bureaucracy, that will be on your third exam. So these three, media, federalism, and then Congress, will be on your second exam, which is, when is that? It's not going to be here. Hold on. Sorry, I'm a little loosey-goosey. Friday, October 18th. So actually, your exam is before your movie assignment. I know it doesn't say that on Brightspace because the Brightspace, like, the essay or the exams are opened by administrative, so it doesn't show up here under assignments. But essay 1 is due this Friday, and then in 2 weeks, you'll have exam 2, and then you'll also have your movie the week after that. I think what I'm going to do, what I've decided for, like, upon looking and reflecting on the grades of the first exam, especially because the second exam, guys, I think I've mentioned this before, the grades usually aren't better than they were on the first. And you did great on the first exam, but I am a little worried about some of the grades that we had. So I'm going to figure out a way to make basically like a Kahoot that you can use on your own. So here we have, let me open this. Obviously, you'll have your study guide, which is right here, study guide, exam 2 study guide. You'll have your study guide here, and you can use that. But I think I'm also going to do like a Kahoot quiz style thing where you can go through questions and study on your own. All of that is to say, this is our last PowerPoint of our second exam. So get ready, gear up. It's 27 slides. I think it is a little long, but we'll get through it pretty quickly. So we're going to talk about the powers and responsibilities of Congress, the clash of representation, partisanship, and lawmaking, the membership of Congress, which is definitely, I should have looked at this, is definitely outdated. So we'll look at that separately. And then the relationship between Congress and citizens. This is a really fun video. I don't know if you can hear this through the recording. I should have tried this before I started recording. Just in case, we're not going to take the time to watch it now, but what I will do is post it in the announcements right this second. So you can just utilize it there. It is, however, also a hyperlink within the lecture. So if you, and I closed out of the lecture. This is so fun. I really have my stuff together today. So you can click on this link, or it's on the announcements. It's a very fun video. I recommend you watch it. It's a Schoolhouse Rock video. So background. Congress, aka our legislative branch, was created by Article 1 of the Constitution. They originally first met on April 1st, 1798. I'm not going to ask you about the date. Just know that's what's happening. However, what you should know is that technically New York was our first state capital. That is on your exam. And then Congress has been numbered since. And it's numbered every 2 years when the House is reelected, as to every 6 years when the Senator is reelected. Here are your requirements. To run for the House of Representatives, you have to be 25. You have to have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years. And then you have to actually inhabit the state in which you are running and will be elected to. We've had a couple of controversies over this in the last couple of elections. People running in states that they don't actually live in or vote in or pay taxes in or own homes in. It's illegal. You can't do that. And then to run for the Senate, you have to be 30. You have to be a citizen for at least 9 years. And again, you have to inhabit the state that you live in. And you will be voted in, and you will serve for. Here are our constitutional powers, right? We already know about the necessary and proper clause, which allows them to make any laws necessary and proper to the running of the country that were not already delegated to them. They create laws. Another big thing here is this power of the purse. They control the money. They make a budget. They determine how much we spend on the military, on education, on housing and welfare, and healthcare. All of the things. How much we spend. They decide that. We have a bicameral legislature. This means we have 2 chambers. We have a House of Representatives. They serve for 2 years. We have a Senate. They serve for 6 years. And then the Constitution was designed so the political process would be slow. Like, it takes a pretty long time for bills to pass through because it's intended to be a safeguard. We can't just get bills going through over and over and over again. That would be too quick. You wouldn't be able to hold people accountable. And again, we're scared of tyranny. We're terrified of it. This is balanced by having a short-term interest and a long-term interest. The short term is obviously represented by our House because they have 2-year terms and they have smaller localities. What would be helpful, I bet, for you guys is to look at this. Right. So not only... I'm so tired. I'm so sorry. Not only are they elected every 2 years, but, like, this is all they're representing. Yes, they work in D.C., and yes, they work on the Hill, and they work in the Capitol with the other hundreds of representatives, but this is all they really care about. Their little break. This is what they get. So your representatives, I believe, would be 7. Summit County, which is where I'm from, is this little thing. It's like most of Summit and then this little bit of Stark. Some of these are obviously bigger, right? Like the 5th district is pretty big. The 2nd district is pretty big. It has like 13, 14 counties in it. Some of them are pretty big. These are all like more rural areas. And that's because it has to be based on population, right? So relatively, the same number of people who live in this little baby district right here is pretty similar to the same number of people that live in any of these big districts. This is Columbus, obviously. Columbus. This is Cleveland, well, northeast Cleveland. This is Cuyahoga County. Their districts are split in half. Cincinnati is right here. Dayton is up here. Toledo is over here. Athens, right here. So, like, all of these places, Akron is in here. These places that have our biggest populations will have smaller districts than these big districts because it has to be relatively similar in population count. The thing that everyone argues about with the Congress, the U.S. Congress, is they do not have federal term limits, which means you can serve and serve and serve and serve and serve and serve and serve until either you only get out in a couple of ways. You're not elected anymore. You pass. You retire. I believe you could also be impeached, but like that doesn't happen. I believe the longest serving Congress member I'll use Wikipedia page here. Okay. Here are longest serving people. At least 36 years. I mean, this guy from Michigan was in office for 60 years. Chuck Grassley, who's still serving, has been in office for basically 50 years. Uninterrupted. This is total. This is uninterrupted, which means straight through, which means elected. This man has been elected every 2 to 6 years for 50 years. Ed Markey, nearly 48 years. Ron Wyden, Chuck Schumer, 44 years, basically. Marcy Kaptur, this is our representative from Ohio. She serves, is this their district? No. It doesn't give their district. But Marcy Kaptur is a congresswoman from Ohio, and she is this district right here. Mitch McConnell, we hear a ton about him. He's about 40 years. Nancy Pelosi is just about 38 years. So these are like all of our big people. Like a lot of the people that we hear of today have been in office for over 40 years. Just constantly getting reelected. And they do this every 2 years, guys. That means you've been elected 20 times. And there's no way to stop them. Oh, I also wanted to, sorry for the switching. I also wanted to see who had been impeached. Presidents, cabinet. Maybe you can't. I really should be more confident with this. Oh, right, you can't, like, impeach. I'm sorry, this was a total brain closed off moment. We don't impeach Congress members, because we just vote them out. But the Congress members can be removed from office. So, our most recent guy, what was his name? Santos, that's his name. He was removed. So you're not impeached, but you can be removed or expelled. That's how you get out. Those are the only 4 ways. And you have control over approximately 2, maybe 3 of them, depending on who you're talking to, what you're arguing. So they have no federal term limits. They can serve over and over again. Similar thing with the Supreme Court. They are there for life. They either get impeached, or they pass, or they retire. They are there until they choose to leave, basically. Our politicians have 3 main interests. The first one is these are not in any particular order. I've just numbered them just for your, mind mapping. The first one is representation. So they're supposed to look out for their local district and the interests of that district. The second is lawmaking, which is national lawmaking. So even though they're only serving this one little district in Ohio, the laws they're passing will have effects nationally, and they should be aware of that. And then the third one is partisanship. They have to represent their party. This is the only thing that's not stated in the Constitution. The Constitution does state their responsibility to representation and national lawmaking, but not to partisanship. So when we're thinking about partisanship, we're thinking about stuff like members of Congress who do not align with their political party and thus do not have that support. Maybe they are getting expelled or removed from Congress, which is not common. I don't want you to think it's common, it's not. But maybe, right, they're not getting support on a bill that they wanted to pass. Or maybe they're not getting financial donations from their House caucus. Whatever it may be, because they're not representing their party. They're not aligning with their party. And most often, when we see stuff like this happen, the politicians will either be completely ousted or they'll just switch parties. It's a very slow process. Very few times will a politician out of left field just say, yeah, I'm switching parties. What will happen is they'll start voting against their party on a couple of things, and then maybe they'll speak out about a really negative member of their party, and then maybe some members of their party will start speaking out against them. It will kind of become like a beef issue, and then at some point they'll say either, okay, I'm done now I'm the other party, or they'll say, okay, great, they've ousted me, right? Like what happened with George Santos. The Republican Party doesn't want me here anymore, so now I'm out, and they're going to have another election. They have these 3 kinds of representation. So you need to know these 3 kinds. So this is their interests. This is what they're serving. Representation are the goals they have or like their responsibilities. So there's allocative representation, which is just creating projects and grants for their district. Like maybe we want to build a bridge, so we have to make sure... I am so sorry. I need to drink more caffeine. So we need to make sure that like this funding for the bridge is in this bill, and they'll do that for their district. They also have pork barrel projects, or sometimes they're commonly called earmarks, which is something added onto a bill to gain support from other representatives. Again, going back to number 1, it's like direct funds for projects. The difference here is whether you're creating it or not. So under number 1, like you're creating this very specific thing. You're saying, I want this thing for my district. Number 2 is often done in conjunction with or by another representative. So if someone really needs Marcy Kaptur to sign on to a bill, they'll add a little sentence in that bill specifically giving District 9 $2 million for a bridge. And then Marcy Kaptur will sign on to that because, number 1, her district's getting money. It'll make her look good. But number 2, then she'll vote for that bill. Maybe otherwise she wouldn't have. So number 2 is used to guarantee votes from other representatives, where number 1 is done for and by the representative of that district. And then number 3 is constituency services. Very simple. You're helping people in district. You should know the term for constituent. It will be on your exam. A constituent is just the person represented. So, if you live in District 9, you are a constituent of the representative for District 9, the statewide government, the senator from your state, both of them, and the president. If you live in District 8, you are a constituent of all of those things, except the Congress member for District 9. Because they're not your representative, and you don't vote for them. You would be a constituent of all those people, and then the district member from District 8. So it's only the people represented. It's not everybody. In some cases, like for the president, Everyone is a constituent of the president. But in Congress, that's not the case. You are only a constituent of the Congress member who appears on your ballot. And they have obviously national representation stuff, which is basically just laws advancing the economic and social interests of their country. We talked about the Yucca Mountain issue. Obviously, the military is always a big thing. The Keystone Pipeline was a really big thing a couple of years ago. Bank bailouts during the recession. All that kind of stuff. So most of this is very district. Like, this is district representation. And then there's national representation. And it's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to talk a little bit about partisanship. This could be an entire discussion over the course of like multiple weeks. But we only have today. So I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but let me know if you have questions. I don't know what this vote is for. Honestly, it doesn't say. But I'll explain it in a second. So hyperpartisanship is when the party is coming first before any other form of representation. Remember, we have national stuff, and then we have local stuff, and you have to do both of those things. Partisanship, hyperpartisanship, is when this is coming before these two things. So a really bad example would be this thing, right? There's a ton of votes here, and these votes are split right down party lines. I mean, like, literally right down party lines. There's one Democrat who voted with the Republicans. And maybe this bill would have been really, really good for Ohio's District 8. But I don't know if this is true, but let's say it's a Republican. But the Republican would have voted no, because it was more important to vote with the rest of the Republicans than it was to be the one Republican voting with Democrats and benefiting your district. Again, I don't know what this bill is. That's just an example. I just wanted to show you this. And then polarization is often tied into this. And it is when the partisanship, parties coming before other forms, polarization is pushing the parties apart. So we're separating ideologies. This is what I was talking about earlier in the year when we were talking about, like, our parties are very much together on the ideological graph. Like, they're in the same quadrant. But we have this idea that, like, Democrats are communists who want to rule the world, and Republicans are dictators who want to rule the world. And we're pushing each other further apart. So now the Republican Party is much more right-wing than we really think they are, or than they might really be. And the Democratic Party is much, much more left-wing than we think they are, or they might really actually be. And it's because we're creating this idea that, like, oh, well, we don't get along, so it must be because we're so different and our ideologies are so far apart. And this radicalization is a really bad cycle where it just keeps happening. So when you're seeing, example, right, let's say you're a Republican and you're seeing the Democratic Party go on these tangents. This is going to get really political. Fair warning. You're a Republican, all right? And you're seeing all these things about how Democrats are just killing babies after they're born. Straight up murder. Right? That's going to push you further right. Like, you're going to say, that's disgusting. I hate that. I'm so radical. Like, they shouldn't be able to do that at all. And Republicans do the same thing, or Democrats do the same thing to Republicans, right? Democrats are sitting here and they see Republicans saying things like we shouldn't, or they have heard, whatever it is, right? They're hearing Republicans, or they're thinking Republicans are saying we shouldn't allow any immigrants, no immigrants, ever. So obviously Democrats are then going to say, well, that's disgusting. I hate that. I think you're totally wrong. We should allow everyone in. And this idea of like the clash that's already happening is continually pushing people further and further apart. And that's polarization. Partisanship is only with our representatives, right? Because they're the only ones voting. They're the only ones who have a responsibility to representation, and they're choosing their party over that. Polarization is happening to everybody. It is a constant thing. Everyone has a part in it. Checks and balances. So here are Congress's checks over the executive branch, aka over the president. They can override a veto. This is pretty difficult. Doesn't happen often. If they pass a bill, president vetoes it, says no, you can't do that. They can then override it. They also have congressional oversight to ensure the executive is carrying out laws as they intended. Again, they can impeach. They're the only ones who can ratify treaties. So even if the president promises to be friends with someone, Congress has to say yes before we actually are friends with them. And then they advise and consent. So when the president gets elected and they're picking their cabinets and their ambassadors and they're picking Supreme Court judges, Congress has to approve all of those people with votes and hearings. And those people do not get to serve as an ambassador or on the Supreme Court unless Congress says they do, even if the president appointed them. And then over judicial, Congress sets up all the lower courts. So you can't just create a court. Congress has to create a court. And they also pay them, right? Power of the purse. Congress is paying everyone. Congress decides how much everyone gets paid, including themselves. They can also impeach federal judges, which doesn't happen very often. Again, they're confirming or denying appointment. So if the president says, will you please be on the Supreme Court? And you say, yeah, I'd love to be on the Supreme Court. Congress can say, actually, no. Pick someone else. Or they can say, yeah, you'd be great. We really want you on the Supreme Court. Jurisdiction. Oh, sorry. One more second. This will come back when we talk about, ideological breakdown of Congress. And, when presidents are picking who they want, whether or not they have a Congress that is the same party or a different party to them. So keep that in mind. They also have jurisdiction. So Congress gets to choose what courts are hearing what cases. And then ultimately, we always talk about court packing with the president stuff. It's Biden's going to court pack or Trump's going to court pack. They can't just do that. Congress has to do it. Because Trump or Biden or Harris can't decide, yeah, we have 6 more Supreme Court judges. They can't do that. They can try. They can appoint. But if Congress does not confirm that appointment, then it's not happening. So we're going to talk about the evolution really quickly. So this is basically all the stuff they do. We're done with that. Now we're moving on to the evolution. We have a census every 10 years. We've talked about this already a little bit. There's a census every 10 years with years ending in 0. So 2000, 2010, 2020, 2030, etc., etc. The survey is conducted by Congress, and it determines who lives where in the house, or where in the U.S. And then this is determined to make up the House. So remember, the House changes based on population. We have to figure out where the population is to decide those changes. In 2020, Texas gained seats, whereas Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania all lost seats, which means Texas's population went up, and either Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania's representation population went down, or it didn't change as much as Texas's did, so they had to give those representatives to Texas. We have had multiple laws passed that capped the number of House seats. Right now we're at 435. So we have 535 total representatives. We have 100 senators, and we have 435 House representatives. This does not change because we had a law passed in 1929 that capped it, which means it can't change. So, seats are moving, but they're not gaining or changing. What this looks like is that as our population grows, so too does the accountability of our representatives. Right? In 1800, one representative represented 35,000 people. Now, in 2024, one representative is responsible for around 705,000 people. And that's why these districts look so funny. 705,000 people live in these little districts. And 705,000 people live in these big districts. And obviously, it will never be exact, right? One district might have 710,000, one district might have 700,000, but it will be relatively the same within those 10,000. We also aren't aware of people who don't fill out the census, right? Like, there's a lot of people who are unhoused that are not counted in the U.S. Census. People who don't fill out the census or answer their doors also will not be counted. So we have estimates that are used to kind of negate that. Like, we know some people aren't going to be counted, so we're going to adjust for that when we make these numbers. But we obviously don't know exactly how many people are in every district. But it should be around this number, right? Which is the level of accountability. So now, one representative is accountable to this many people. It used to be this many people, but now it's this many people. And it could be good, right? Like, their number of votes will change dramatically, but it could also be detrimental in that you're not able to do as many constituency services as you may be able to do because there's so many people. And when you make a law, it might not be the best for everyone in your district because there's so many different people. Which leads us to this, which is that the ratio in the growing population is really preventing an actual meaningful relationship and communication and voting records and accountability between citizens and their representatives. So there's a legitimate worry that representatives will become out of touch, not only because their districts are so large, but also because they do not have, where's it at? They don't have term limits. They just get to keep going and going and going and going. And some people might make the argument that could be good, right? Because they don't have term limits, they can keep being elected, which makes them more accountable. But some people argue the opposite. So there's two terms you need to know when we're talking about actual districting. The first is redistricting, the process of drawing these lines where it has to maintain an equal amount of population. So redistricting is just these lines. So in 2026, Ohio will redraw these lines. And this district might get a little bit smaller, this one might get a little bit bigger, this one might include Fairfield County, like they'll change a little bit. And that's the process of redistricting. The other idea here is gerrymandering, which is the process of drawing districts to benefit a particular group, often based on partisanship or racial lines. So it looks like this. These are Ohio districts. And what happens is you can break it up in two ways by partisanship. The first is this little section over here is probably going to vote a little bit more Democratic. It's right on the edge of Cleveland. It's a little bit more urban. And generally it's going to vote a little bit more liberal. Whereas all this over here is farm country. It's very rural. There's not a ton of people there. And they're going to vote pretty Republican. Pretty conservative. So we're going to cut this little piece out here. We're going to take these votes that would go to Democrats, and we're going to lump them in with all of these Republicans. So these votes aren't going to really count as much, because these votes aren't going to go to elect a Democrat. They're going to elect a Republican. Even if they vote the other way, everyone else in their district is going to vote Republican. Same thing here. All of this is Toledo. This is Cedar Point area. These are like pretty urban, liberal areas. This is most of Cleveland. This is upper Cleveland. They're going to vote Democrat. Democrat, 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 Democrat. So we're going to take these little bits here, these little Republican bits, and we're going to lump them in with all these Democrats. So their votes, like their votes, don't matter quite as much. A Democrat is going to win this seat. And for the sake of argument, just so you all know, this is Marcy Kaptur's district. It doesn't look like this anymore, but it did look like this. And this was Representative Jim Jordan. He's Republican, she's a Democrat. So you can do it one of two ways. Either you break up votes for the other party to win, right? So we're taking Democratic votes and putting it in a big group of Republicans, so the Republicans win. Or you stretch a district to include all of one vote to make sure that that person is winning. That's what happened here, right? We're stretching all of the Democratic votes here, all the Democratic votes here, and all the Democratic votes here to make sure a Democrat is going to win this seat. You also do it through racial lines, and it's very often the same thing. Like, if you break down demographics, more often than not, people who are people of color will more than likely vote Democrat, whereas white people more than likely will vote Republican. So you'll break up districts that way. But most often it is done through partisanship. And even then is like still a partisan way to gerrymander. Here's just some more districts that just like look crazy. Like this district is literally in the middle of another district. This district, this is all, it kind of looks funny because you can't tell what this is, but all of this white space is other districts. So this district is broken up by like all these things. And then this district is crazy. Again, all of these are other districts. If I remember correctly, this is broken down by actual parties. So this is a Republican, that's a Democrat. I think this is a Republican, and this is a Democrat. I know for a fact this is a Democrat. This could be a Democrat, but I'm not sure. I think it's Republican. Sometimes, like, districts will be split on streets. Sometimes they'll be split in houses. That has happened before. We've had court cases about it before, and if that ever happens to you, you will be in the district in which your bedroom falls. So look at your little map of your house and see where your bedroom is. Here's what our Congress currently looks like. It's basically 50-50 in the Senate. The vice president is the tie-breaking votes. Technically, Republicans have more, but there are some independents, or like Bernie Sanders, who is a democratic socialist or whatever, who will vote with Democrats but just don't count towards the Democrats in the count. The House is a Republican majority right now. Even though they have a majority, this is pretty historic for Democrats because the Republicans are very factioned and very split, so they're having a difficult time getting a lot of things passed. There's very, very little descriptive representation. So similar to our framers, our Congress is made up almost entirely of lawyers and millionaires and businessmen who have a lot of money or advanced degrees, and it doesn't look like what our actual population looks like. The median population of the House or of the Senate is much, much higher than the median income of general average Americans. There are some examples, primarily on the Democratic side, where people like AOC or Max Frost don't have a lot of advanced degrees. They don't have a lot of money. They're not lawyers. Generally speaking, the Democratic Party does elect more diverse population than the Republican Party, but it's still not quite what the country looks like. Max Frost is the youngest member of the Congress. He is a Gen Z, and when he was elected, he actually couldn't rent an apartment in DC because he didn't have enough money and his credit score was so bad. So he was like couch surfing while going to the Capitol Hill and voting. This is what our Congress kind of, again, I think we're a little outdated, but this is what it looks like, generally speaking. We have elected a new, maybe we're still in the 18th? I think we're still in the 18th. I don't really know what I'm talking about. Yeah, okay. So we're still here. So we're still in the 18th. Which is great. I thought that I didn't update this, but I did. This is about what it looks like. Broken down by race and then by gender. So this is what Congress looks like. This is what the population looks like. Congress, actual population. These numbers, even though they're not exactly representative, are still pretty historic. And it gets better. It gets like more representative every year. So here are our people. This is outdated. Don't look at this bottom half. This top half is pretty consistent. So our Senate is obviously led by our vice president. Remember, the vice president serves in both the executive branch and the legislative branch. They are the only person to serve in two branches. Right now, our VP is obviously Harris. Then we have the pro tempore, who is the longest serving majority leader. And if the VP can't be there, maybe they're off campaigning or they're serving their role as executive, whatever it is, the pro tempore will sit in. We have majority and minority leaders, aka whoever is leading the Democrats or the Republicans. Whoever is majority, whoever is minority, they'll lead the party. And then whips. And whips are the people who get the votes, right? So if the Democrats are trying to pass something and they don't have enough votes, the whips will literally go around and whip their party into shape. And they'll get all the Democratic votes they need. In the House, we have a Speaker of the House who is elected by the majority party. Then we also have a majority leader and a minority leader, and then the whips. So it looks very similar. Just like how state government looks like federal government, both branches of Congress look the same. We do have committees. These are not in the Constitution, but they have been created to keep order. There are 3 different kinds. Or maybe 4. There's 4. So there are standing committees, which are permanent committees. They are very powerful. The representation, the people in them change. The committee does not change. And it's like all of our big stuff. So agriculture, banking, armed forces, commerce, science, like all of the big stuff is a constant, permanent committee. The select committee is often temporary, and it is created to deal with things that do not fall within one of these already existing committees. A joint committee is members from both chambers. So if you remember, if you watched our voting video, a bill has to pass the House and the Senate to be passed. So the joint committee is members from the House and the Senate, and they'll meet to talk about what they think will pass in their own branch, or like half of Congress. And then the last one is a conference committee, which is created to resolve differences between the chambers for specific legislation. So if we're passing a budget bill and the House and the Senate do not agree, a conference committee will be called, only to resolve the differences on that specific bill. The House and Senate are equal in power. All bills have to pass both, and both can start legislation. All bills have a number. They are vetted. House bills go to the Rules Committee. Senate bills immediately go to the floor. This is because the House has so many more members than the Senate. So how do they actually vote? Voting is by a roll call. So they'll call out either the name, or they'll call out the Ohio representative from District 9. And then you either say, yes, I vote for it, or no, I do not. It has to pass both chambers in the same form. So if it passes the House, and then the Senate adds one sentence, it has to go back to the House. Nothing can be changed. Both houses have to vote on the same bill. And after they do, it goes to the president, and he can either sign it, or he can veto it. There's actually a couple other things he can do, but we'll talk about that when we talk about the president. So for this argument, he can either sign it or he can veto it. And if he vetoes it, it goes back to Congress. And if it's a very, very popular bill that a lot of people love from both parties, they can overrule the veto with 2/3 of Congress. A filibuster is the actual debating process. So when you're debating a bill, there's no time limit. So what some people will do, if they know that a bill is going to pass, but they really don't want it to, is they'll filibuster. And this works best if they're about to leave session. So if they're like about to close down, or maybe it's Christmas, a filibuster works best. And basically a representative will just get up there and they'll just yap. They'll just talk. And it has to be somewhat related to the bill, but I mean, you can use that. It's pretty subjective. So you could just talk about whatever you want for however long you can. And if you do it long enough, eventually Congress will just have to end the session. And then the voting can't happen. And the bill won't get passed. In order to end a filibuster, you need 3/5 vote, which is really, really hard to get. If the filibuster is going and no one can stop it, then the majority leader can try to stop it. But a simple majority, which means just more than half, can say, no, we're going to let the filibuster go. So really the only way to do it is with this massive majority vote. Gridlock is just the idea that it's far easier to kill a bill than it is to pass one. Because to pass it, you need a lot of people to vote for it. But in gridlock, it's where basically you're split and no one will switch sides. So if you can't vote to pass it, it just automatically dies. Framers did intend for this to be a really long process, but because of partisanship and hyper-partisanship and having a two-party system where everyone is more concerned about getting elected than passing bills, oftentimes it's completely ineffective and no bills are getting passed, except like maybe the budget. But even then, it takes months. The government shuts down much more frequently than it used to because of partisanship. So that's all I have on Congress. There are a lot of little details, little like small things that I wasn't able to touch on now, but will be referenced later. And Congress is like pretty strong, maybe the strongest branch, arguably. And there's a lot of little details. So if you're ever interested, let me know, we can chit chat, but also just like do a quick Google. Just like, what are the rules of Congress? Because it's kind of nuts. So other than that, we have our essay this Friday, and then exam 2, and I'm gonna figure out how to post a little link, like a Kahoot type thing for you to study for exam 2. And then your movie assignment is in a couple of weeks, and I really recommend and kind of hope and kind of force you to take 5 minutes and think about how you feel about the movie. If you have any issues, we can chat privately. You can email me or message me on Discord. That's about it. Cool. Thanks, guys.